Okay, this is part two of the week 8 Ask Dr. Zeus. I'm sharing again your examples and discussing them as a way to develop a craft understanding and craft knowledge about how to learn into emotions and transform these what we consider to be negative emotions, more antisocial emotions, more difficult emotions, into these positive emotions, not by avoiding them or suppressing them or regulating them, but by engaging in conversation, relationship, and engaging in a head-based and heart-based inhabiting these emotions and finding ways not only just to cope with them, but to actually learn from them and grow from them. So again, conflicts, when we experience them, or anxiousness or fear, tend to make us normally recoil and say, like touching a hot stove. But emotions aren't the same as a hot stove. Emotions can be doorways for our own deeper learning in life and our ability to develop our character and our ability to do some of the most positive things in our life. When I ask most people what has been a key moment or pivotal moment in really helping them grow or really helping them become the person they are, oftentimes it's not the successes. Most often it is the failures or the difficult emotions when faced squarely that allows a person to open up, look to a larger community, a larger way of being, maybe even a larger or higher power, if that's what works for you, to really consolidate and open and strengthen who they are. So these exercises are meant to do that, to give you constructive and structured ways to challenge yourself, to engage something you might recoil from, and in so doing, build your character and build your emotional, not just intelligence, but your excellence, your emotional excellence. So let's go to one example here. A negative emotion I have been experiencing lately is anxiousness over whether or not I've taken too big of a load. Very typical for a student. I'm currently in the process of building a home from scratch with my boyfriend. We have picked out our engagement ring, so I know wedding planning is not too far away. I'm taking a full load of schoolwork so I can graduate in December, and I'm currently being considered for promotion at work. So I can't tell you, it sounds crazy, but how typical that is. So many people are overachievers. They're doing basically everything at once. So this is an important one here. This emotion is undesirable as a whole because I've been worrying so much that it's making it hard for me to keep up with my schoolwork. Worrying about all these different things fitting together that none of them are quite getting addressed. I need to intervene and do a hard stop mentally today in order to get back on track. Today is my day off of work this week, and I'm going to use it to catch up on my schoolwork and try to get back to my normal routines. I need to place my priority back on school before my grades start to suffer. This is my last full semester. Next semester I only take 2 classes, so I need to stay focused for a few more months. And so she goes on to say, I usually work the 4 a.m. shift. Typically allow myself to sleep in and take it slow on days off. But today I forced myself to wake at 6 a.m. Again, since graduating, number 5 here, engagement, building a home, and getting a promotion are all seriously positive life events, I need to focus on reversing the anxiety into excitement. Something that simple can be very, very helpful, actually, okay? By getting so entranced in getting everything done, you lose the excitement and don't take the step back to say, listen, I'm excited about these things. They have a positive, impelling drive for me. So again, a nice insight there. If I felt it half as excited as I do to push forward for all these things, I would have be much more productive. That's true. If you're motivated by a positive passion, rather than forcing yourself into something, it is so much easier to get things done, and it's so much more enjoyable. And again, she said, I want to turn my thought to a more grateful mindset. Again, gratitude, I can't tell you sometimes how undersold that is. We'll get a little bit more room on that side there. But it should not be. Gratitude and just being grateful for having these things in your life can be a very big motivator and a great way to enhance your emotional health. So here's conflict here. The area of persistent conflict I identify happens to be with my husband. It might seem very insignificant at first, but this is the relationship I wish to work on the most, even in little details. Again, this is from one of your fellow classmates. And again, very, very brilliantly put out here. This is because many times it's the little details left unresolved that can damage relationships. I've come a long way from the way I see and treat men since I met my husband. However, there's still many instances in which I was on the defensive all the time, ready to strike back when no one was striking me to begin with. Again, past patterns and so forth come oftentimes establish emotional responses that have almost nothing to do with the actual evidence of the situation or the person that's presenting him or herself to you. So recently I became aware of this and began to realize I cannot always think he has the worst intention for what he's doing. Again, that's brought back from the past. I began to realize how sometimes it's easier for me to show mercy to people outside my home, and how that was unfair to my husband, who is a person who loves me more. I can't tell you how common that is. People are the nastiest of people who love them the most because they feel like that person will accept them. They build up all these emotions from dealing with other people and hiding their true emotions, kind of lying about their true emotion, and then it all comes spilling out. Like, well, I don't want to say vomit, but like some kind of, on the person they love, because they feel like they can be themselves and will be accepted no matter what around that person. But the message that sends is that person, you're not caring for that person who's caring for you. So this was an important insight to make. Anyway, without knowing that this assignment was coming, I began to show empathy to him whenever he did or said something to me. And I realized how many little arguments or feelings hurt could be avoided if I thought the man who decided to marry me does have my best interest at heart. Again, I put in here, link of thought and feeling. This is how thought and feeling come together. For some reason, I tried to show his intentions were selfish, and I realized I did not need to do that. Whenever he said something, I tried to put myself in his shoes and realize I could feel that way toward him. Then I could be able to accept he feels that way toward me without any hidden intentions. The result was rather odd. It was not easy to turn our lives around from one day to the next. Now, actually, I came to realize my husband is now in the defensive thanks to my acting over the years. So he's developing an emotional pattern now. Now he's the one that questions my intentions, a little amazed when I say, no, I'm just saying you're right. I guess it might seem like the problem grew from one person to two. Very astute again. The truth is, however, that we both realized that what was going on, and that it's always the first step in growing. Realizing there is a problem, we are now on our way to healthier interactions. A great rendition and account of how patterns can be broken. If we do have unconscious patterns and we put them against a person, they'll develop unconscious patterns, and you get locked in this unhealthy relationship. But if you interrupt those patterns, create a new one through this hard stop mentality, and finding a way to really see the best interests of that person and be empathetic with them, then all of a sudden you've changed the chemistry, and a new kind of pattern can grow from that, a much healthier one. So that's sort of what's happening here. Like I said, learning into your feelings and applying what you learn, it works. So this one says, so my biggest traumatic experience was one with my little sister when I was a little girl, and she asked me when I was going to be pretty. Yikes. When are you going to be pretty? That's not a very nice way to say something. I now do two actions that are both related to this event, as well as they contradict each other. Now, this is very common. Emotions are trying to find their way, they can do this. I now emotionally respond with either dressing up on days where I feel like I need to be pretty, or giving up on days when I feel like there's no point in trying. How many of you can relate to that? Okay, you put an impossible standard forward. You internalized what seemed like a criticism from a long time ago, and it still works in your understanding of your own self-esteem, self-worth. I seem to be under, this is in the yellow, I seem to be under this impression that pretty defines worth, and even in my heart, I know it doesn't. Kind of made me think, when I was actively trying to be pretty for this assignment, to go against what my sister and numerous other people had told me. What I discovered is I'm not pretty. My sister was right. I'm beautiful. Now, it's an interesting distinction between here. Again, pretty is external. Remember, we talked about external to external is what we're trying to get away from. And we're trying to get away from internal to internal. Pretty is how you're judged or approved of. Like her sister. When are you going to be pretty? Okay, an external description or judgment. Beauty, on the other hand, is an internal qualitative feeling of radiance. Okay, beauty is inner, reflected in the glow, right? If you're feeling beautiful inside, that tends to glow through you to the outside. and it transcends circumstance. Seems like this person came into that insight. I love humorous examples. Here's a humorous example. Again, pet peeve. This is from an old assignment, but wonderful example. He's terrible at cleaning up after himself. He'll leave cups and bottles around. He'll throw food wrappers around. Overall, he's just a messy guy. I pester him and I nag him. It doesn't work. So what she did was trying an experiment. Again, remember how important surprise is when it comes to really driving changes in behavior. Surprise helps interrupt patterns in a non-threatening way. That's why research shows that it's great at catching someone's attention. So I said I kept cleaning up my own things and having my kids clean up their items, but we left all of his. After a couple of days, he did begin to notice that there were lots of socks on the floor and his empty water bottles along with other trash. He just looks over at me and says, I really don't pick up after myself. I had to laugh, like, no duh. He has made more of an effort to at least throw trash away. I suppose the other stuff will just take longer. See, that's it. A lot of times this takes longer. People get frustrated and they take care of it for them. But this is a great instance in which there's patience and humor used to help a person understand for themselves emotionally and mentally what they can do to contribute. Good thing marriage is supposed to last a lifetime. Again, a very humorous statement. Unless he annoys me to death, ha ha, just kidding. I was surprised when he noticed and admitted fault. So I will take what I can. Any progress is good progress. Very humorous, very loving and accepting, and at the same time, very effective. Love it, love it, love it, okay? Informing consequences, letting people discover for themselves and make their own choices. These are the things that allow better emotional habits to happen and more effective behavior to result. So, okay, this is another person who talks about referring again to some of the literature, saying the expressive components of emotion like nonverbal displays or vocal tone are central to communication and coordination of social interaction. This person, going down to the yellow here, was not allowed to publicly display emotions that were negative or that gave off the idea that something was wrong. Again, perfect for week 10, okay, where we're talking about how we suppress emotions or lie about our state of things, sometimes in order to quote unquote save other people's feelings, okay? But it ends up making something wrong or in terms of authentically expressing your own feelings. This affected me because when I get in arguments now, specifically with my husband, I simply say whatever and ignore the situation. Get the silent treatment or pretend it didn't happen. My husband is the opposite. He likes to talk things through immediately and solve issues instantly. This is kind of an oil and water thing here. This time around, I got upset over his behavior when I went out to give a friend a quick ride, something that just came up. I knew that when I got home, my husband was going to expect me to behave as normal and think that I walked away from the situation. I made the point of sitting next to him on the couch and apologizing, even though I still felt like some of it was his fault. Doesn't have to be perfect. And I explained why the situation made me feel the way it did. He immediately turned around, surprised, hugged me, and said, forget it. I was so shocked. All it took was a different behavior. I was more surprised that he simply dropped it and continued in a good mood like it never happened. It made me feel a lot better. See, again, beginning to come together with one another on these things. Just taking the time to address the emotion instead of simply trying to avoid it. A lot of times we build something up in our mind around addressing avoidance, and if we just do it in an empathetic and straightforward way, it works. Okay. Haidt talks about empathy being triggered by simply reading or seeing an injustice, and these emotions can create pro-social behavior. This is what I think happened to me while watching TV earlier that day. When getting into bed for the night, I asked my husband what specifically bothered him about my behavior. This is another entry here from one of your fellow students. I have this idea that we can just forget it and continue on, but he said it was not necessarily the behavior, but the fact that I didn't seem to care about his feelings. My husband said I did what was best for me and kind of just left him to deal with it on his own, but he cannot get over it. He does not talk about it. He said that maybe I felt better after a couple hours, but to him it only got worse because he wasn't able to talk it through. And this is when they have a conflict or something. This made me feel like a terrible person. Okay, that's okay temporarily, but don't continue that way. All right. I immediately explained that it was not what I meant and that we just had different ways of handling it. I had not realized how my actions made him feel. Okay. So again, Okay. Um, just by talking this over and acknowledging where someone comes, even if the problem itself isn't necessarily solved, because a lot of times research shows, Gottman's research shows, that it's mainly in accepting where the other person is coming from, not trying to change them. That really helps these relationships become healthier and much more manageable. Just wanting to be heard and acknowledged and felt and loved for who someone is, okay? And if you make good attempts to work on things you can work on, like cleaning up after yourself. So another one, many of you talk about pet peeves with being friends on the, with friends on always being on the cell phone. But here is a person that actually asked them to say, let's put it away. We're going to have a rule, no cell phone while having our dinner. And here's an interesting thing that came out of it. At the beginning, everyone was silent, like if they did not have that much to say or share. I started to ask questions about work, school, and children. All of a sudden, everyone had something to say. We talked for long hours, sharing stories that were full of emotions. Sometimes we'd be happy, then sad, angry, annoyed, etc. It all depended on which story was shared and the empathy we felt with the friends that was sharing the story. At the end of the night, when we were saying our goodbyes, I noticed that we were all happy and stress-free. I received some comments such as, we should try these again. And one of my friends said, it's true, we don't die if we ignore our cell phones once in a while. I had so much fun, it was a great experiment. There's something I want to note here. Not only was this successful, and not only you're experiencing a full range of emotions, but now let's get at the motive sometimes when people get into cell phones. Remember, we've been taught over and over again to suppress or avoid emotions. And what is the perfect device to do that with? A cell phone. But guess what it also helps you avoid? Any kind of meaningful interaction, any kind of expression and sharing of emotion, etc., etc. The problem here is an underlying assumption that emotions are generally negative, and we concentrate on the negative emotions. But when you're sharing them empathetically, you could be sad, happy, annoyed, etc. But it is all helping you enliven and experience the full range of your being. And you're not avoiding it, you're doing it in a very supportive social framework. So again, another great example about how creating a supportive social framework in which you don't avoid your emotions, but you actually share them, creates a fulfillment and an emotional health and range that can't obviously happen when you're sticking your face in a cell phone screen. So again, this is breaking the pattern of addictive behavior. Being caught up opens the space for relaxation and sharing. Another person says, in a previous assignment, I explained how I could not simply accept a compliment. I would even put myself down thinking that the other person was just trying to make me feel good, but did not really mean the comment. So we're jumping down here, skipping a little bit to the yellow section here. So I've been gradually incorporating a different method of accepting compliments. Instead of the usual self put downs, I now respond with thank you and an added compliment to myself. Well, I've done this only a couple of times. Let me tell you, it feels awkward. It feels like I'm not myself. For an example, my husband recently told me that my face is looking much better and that the medication that I'm taking is working. Instead of pointing out another of the many flaws I have to counteract this positive comment, I simply replied, thank you. I noticed it too. He noticed immediately that I didn't say something negative, and he looked at me kind of like in awe and walked away. So again, see what happens with the surprise and when you interrupt something and you reverse it. That's what we've been doing here. All of a sudden, this is emotional behaviorism. You're acting in a different way, interacting in a different way with someone else, and it's creating different emotional states and patterns as a result. Okay? She talked about this book by John Gray. It talks about when you are young, we're taught that too much self-love can lead to conceit or egotism. That's true, that people will criticize you for loving yourself. So instead, we learn to hide our self-love, which can lead to forgetfulness or repression. Again, hiding from emotion rather than addressing it and even embracing it, especially when it comes to something like self-love. I think that's true, and I don't think true self-love ever leads to egotism, all right? Tooting your own horn and feeling good about yourself are two different things. And it's not so bad to toot your own horn once in a while anyway. So by using emotional behaviors, I can change my pattern of destructive behavior toward myself. I can learn not just to reverse the negative thinking, but also learn how to physically and verbally apply it. Wow, was that a great summary statement or what? That's exactly right. That's what we're trying to do in this class, and we're having some great results, and I'm glad to say. Here's another example. I have written about a traumatic situation before of when I lost two of my best friends because of an issue that arose, which then resulted in me becoming more closed off to my other friendships. The trauma of losing my two best friends caused me to feel like if I ever became close with a friend again, I would result in me losing them. This is very typical here. We're saying that once I'm in a conversation that starts to get a little deeper, really personally, I tend to close up and get very quiet. So in order to try the opposite, I decided to really open up to one of my closest friends and talk to her about family problems and ask her for any advice, which I never do. Once I asked her, she was what it seemed like pleasantly surprised. She was very happy to offer me advice on what I should do. Although it was very hard to let my guard completely down and open up, I forgot how good it can feel to confide in someone else and made me want to open up to her even more in the future. See, it is a process, but it starts with one small step and then testing or experimenting rather than saying, oh my God, the whole world rides on whether this works or not. Say the friend it didn't quite work with that friend. But to say, it was worthy to experiment that way. In this case, it was nice, okay? But not to believe that one instance goes for all. Arguing by text is another one here. We've already talked about text, so I'll skip over that one. Another person says here, this assignment could not have come at a more perfect time, as I was just at a close friend's house the other night discussing how I can tackle my recurring issue that I have with my fiance. Persistent conflict we have is the lack of active listening he executes when we're discussing an important issue that needs to be solved, and both of our lack of ability to not get defensive when action does not occur to resolve the issue even when there's valid reasoning. Okay? His lack of active listening has become increasingly noticeable. For we will discuss that issue what is at hand, try to suggest ways to solve it, and then later on, when it hasn't been solved and the topic is confronted once more, we both instantly become guarded and defensive. So there's your problem. So let's go look at this, because here, in order to best mitigate the distancing effect and promote empathy, rather than assuming threat, I wanted to ensure we did not just use semantic processing, just words, because that doesn't seem to be working here, okay? By decoding messages visually to determine emotion and respond empathetically, right? I was encouraged when my fiance looked surprised when I mentioned we need to have an active conversation about our continued conflict, speaking in a rational manner and ensuring I didn't make it sound like a one-sided blame game was about to start, interrupting our normally unconscious pattern of jumping to defense from a start to ensure that this was going to be two-sided. Okay, again, we're kind of doing that hard stop and we're reframing it. Here's a really, really great insight. I began the conversation by stating we have a common conflict of both of our inability to execute solutions to our larger problems in life. When you frame it as both of you, then it creates a shared common space. Brilliant move. And by asking him what makes him frustrated when we have a conversation, both during and after when nothing happens to solve the problem. He soon started to open up to me with more than one or two word answers, his surprise replaced by a slightly guarded look, with almost a hint of regret on his face. So she's really looking at the facial things, and maybe Ekman has helped with that. He first started by saying he was frustrated, not at the events of confrontation, by his lack of knowing how to solve the problem and being overwhelmed by the ideas that came up with and his lack of input. He seems to process this slower. And if she keeps throwing ideas at him, it's hard for him to really take that on. I empathized with him. This is continuing up here. And realizing I often come out as the get shit done persona, taking charge more times than not, realizing by his words that I have a tendency to come off as pushy and angry, like I'm upset with him. I asked him what actions I commonly do or how I can better include him in our problem-solving process, and also prompted him to tell me how he normally works through problems that arise, such as work, in which he always excels and often tells me of his accomplishments of problem-solving and customer management. He told me, now this is great, his first reaction is normally guilt that he did something wrong, and how he will stick with this emotion until he has time to clear his head and write out possible solutions. So he's probably responding to a past emotional pattern from his own family. But he's at least learned to manage it by putting a hard stop on it, even if he does feel guilt, whether or not that's legitimate or not, or that's warranted or not. And he takes a little bit of time to clear his head and think about possible solutions, and then he comes forward. Otherwise, he has a tendency to execute avoidance and not talk about the issue, probably because it builds his guilt level up. Okay. Later conversations that prompt the issue, just causing him more frustration as his guilt grows and the issue is still present. The action tendency of guilt is often seen as positively prototypical moral emotion due to its ability to motivate someone to fix a transgression. That's the short-term thing, but guilt in the long term is not helpful, in my experience, because it continues to place stress on you. It may motivate you to try to fix a problem, but it's the wrong kind of motivation. It's a negative motivation, okay? It'd be a better idea if it was motivated by empathy or if it was motivated by a desire to do a job well and not to take on something as a failure, to simply just take it on as another piece of learning, another piece of information in order to learn and to learn how to do your craft better, okay? Guilt is an external fix. So what's going on here? Though this flare of motivation to fix a conflict at hand and his inability to think of a strategy, or through this flare of motivation, I can see why he would feel pressured and would want to avoid the confrontation until he thought of a better way. So she'd be including him in an open and active dialogue to come to a solution through joint effort, ensuring our social survival through the emotions experienced and discussed. Great reference to the different texts here. This assignment helped me give me a new perspective on my significant other, gained me new insights to the problem I thought we were having of lack of active listening, when in reality he was listening, but he felt accused and guilty for not being able to equally contribute to a conversation. We were able to successfully talk about his insecurity and defense mechanisms, hopefully being able to deter, I think she's trying to say here, future conflicts of this nature. See, again, it didn't really have to do with someone's inability to actively listen. It had to do with different ways of processing emotions. And once the two parties involved understood it was a common problem and were able to see how each one of them processed emotions, especially around change or improvement or trying to get something to work better, then all of a sudden you have a common ground with which to work, whereas before it was just a battle. One person thinking that the other person was against them, when in fact it was just different ways of processing that created the conflict. This is a really important insight to apply to any relationship that you have, and most especially the ones that are very close to you. Here's another one about checking the phone, since we've already done that. Oh, wait a minute. I think there was an interesting thing here. Oh, yeah, this was a great one. No, what was it? Maybe it was the other one I skipped over. Another creative one. I don't think it's this one, but the other one, maybe the one I skipped over because it was a phone, where the person kept having another friend type on the phone, even up to 5 to 10 minutes in their presence. So they ended up doing the same thing. And then the other person began to notice and pick up on it. Let's see if this one's not the same one. But again, it's similar to the person who allowed her husband to leave things on the floor and not pick them up. Once they saw the consequences of their own behavior mirrored back at them, then they were able to notice. Okay. And I'm thinking here, was there anything extra here? Oh yeah, this person actually just kept it cool and kept talking even when the person was on the phone, and really put their attention toward the person. So they felt more of a pressure to get off their phone because the person was being addressed directly. So that's another way of doing it. So we have 3 great ways of doing it. Just telling people to put away their cell phones and actually ask them about their lives. That was one. Another one was imitating what the other person is doing so that other person would experience the consequences of what it's like to be treated and ignored by doing the same behavior they were doing. And finally, the other one is saying, really being engaged face to face with them in such a way that, that kind of cell phone kind of looks like it gets in the way and they put it to the side. So again, what's happening in all these interactions here is people are actually engaging through relationship with each other's emotional patterns in a non-threatening way that really is looking to get at the underlying patterns so that there can be a workable interaction and solution. Sometimes a solution is just about finding a way to get a shared way of relating. And then these things happen. Oh, this is it. Okay, this was the one. She said, what I did is I waited for my frustration to subside over the other person using her own cell phone 5 or even 10 minutes, and I did something completely unexpected. I did what she was doing. I took out my phone and started surfing the web, texting, and once my friend noticed, she got annoyed at me for doing it and eventually explained to her that what she was doing was pretty rude since time with friends is important to me. So this was the one. Sorry, I jumped ahead on this one. But again, that was using reversal is not just you're reversing your behavior, it could be reversing their behavior by switching up and mirroring them and literally putting them in your shoes instead of the other way around. So again, these are all examples of creative ways and humorous ways sometimes to begin to create surprise, to break up that old kind of way of doing things, and in a way that doesn't create threat, but creates an opportunity or opening between people. So this person that I did encourage to karaoke, she did say she was going to go out and try it. And she said, I honestly was just happy to have it done and over with. My very supportive boyfriend reassured me that I was fine and that we had fun, but I didn't really want to do it again. I feel like karaoke is just one of those things I can't do without liquid courage. The few things I would say about this is go out and do it again. It takes a few times to get over an aversion. Keep it up and see what happens. So continue with that experiment and let us know how it works. Go out a few more times. I think it's something like 20 times to get over an aversion. Like a food aversion, you have to taste it like 20 times and eventually, to get a real grip on whether or not you like or don't like something. Here is a brilliant one too. I invited this person who has a perfectionist issue to type out her entry on a discussion board without correcting any of the text. So here's discussion board spelled SID decision board, but I'm not using the backspace key and I'm not using Word for autocorrect, and I'm just letting things flow without correcting them. So she's taken me up on this challenge. I've already see 3 little red squigglies. Make that 4 pop up, and my eye may be twitching. So for those who listen to Dr. Zeus's forced video, first, of course, she's not correcting here. One of my writings was the last one he talked about, and he actually made this suggestion that I make a personal effort to not be perfect. So again, you're creating a reversal here. You're intentionally doing something to mess with your patterns, okay? I let it be known that I'm far from a perfect person. I don't wear makeup. I sometimes skip a night of showering and wear my hair up next day. I prefer to dress down. So she's not just this kind of like anal retentive, like everything's got to be perfect. But her work, she really has anxiety about making that really professional. I learned so early that the written word is lasting and my professionalism is permanent. And for that reason, these things must be perfect. So it's not for everything in our life, but just sort of professional work. Well, I think that there is an element of good in striving to be perfect, or maybe striving to be your best, which in my case is being drilled it has to be no less than 100%. This personal desire to succeed can be character building and do just that, unless in my case it has caused such a desire to succeed that it no longer is fun to obtain it and instead causes anxiety in whatever end situation. My initial reaction to spelling errors, run-on sentence, and miscapitalized I's was one of unease. To be honest, it was habitual to backspace everything to pause when I type and reread at least twice to make sure I'm not making sense. Okay? Well, I put here's an interesting extra thing here. Flow matters in writing. Why not just let the mistakes come and compose with flow and then go back and edit? What I like about this offering is that you allowed your mistakes to be instructive to others, which was the purpose of this. So the others of you watching this, literally you can visually see it. It's not just breaking the habit, but breaking the mentality of perfectionism that can be freeing. And yes, humor helps. We want to have a longer term approach versus a short term approach here. You correct something that's short term. Long term approach is doing something like this and messing with your pattern. Okay. All right. Well, we're up to 34 minutes. I'm not sure how many of these we can do, but I'm just loving it. And so I will go ahead and stop this one and we'll start one for week 9. Okay. All right. Again, blessings everyone here, and let's continue. Thanks. We'll see you. Bye-bye.